In 1922, an archaeologist named Herbert Weld-Blundell pulled a small clay prism out of the ground in southern Iraq. It was about 8 inches tall and it had 4 sides, and it was covered in cuneiform writing. When scholars took it back to Oxford and started reading it, they couldn't make sense of what it was saying. It's called the Sumerian King List, and it was basically a government record. Ancient civilizations kept these to track who ruled and for how long, and the first line says, "After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu." The Sumerians considered Eridu the first city ever built. Their creation traditions describe it as the place where civilization began. The rulers came from the sky. That's how the document begins. And then it lists 8 kings whose reign lengths don't make a ton of sense. The first king, Allulim of Eridu, reigned for 28,800 years. His successor ruled for 36,000 years. The next for 43,200 years. Altogether, there were 8 kings with 241,200 years of combined rule. And then the flood came, and everything after that was completely different. Those reign length numbers have been covered a lot, but what almost nobody mentions is that 7 of those 8 kings had advisors. 7 beings sent by the god Enki from somewhere beneath the earth. Each served as advisor to one of the pre-flood rulers. The Sumerians called them the Apkallu. But the 8th and final pre-flood king, Abaratutu, had no Abgallu advisor, which is its own strange detail that nobody can really explain. But the 7 that did serve brought with them a purpose that was recorded across multiple independent cuneiform sources. And that's to give humanity everything civilization will be built on, like writing, mathematics, agriculture, law, architecture, and how to read the movements of the sky. The first of these beings was called Uana. A Babylonian historian, Berosus, who was writing around 290 BC, described what Uana looked like when he arrived. He came from the sea with the body of a fish, a human head underneath the fish's head, and human feet below the tail. Every day he came out of the Persian Gulf and taught humanity, and every night he went back into the water. Berosus wrote something important about what Uana did. He said that since Uana came, nothing further had ever been discovered. Everything civilization would ever be built on, mathematics, writing, agriculture, law, the arts of building, was handed over in full before the flood by a being who came out of the sea every morning and went back to it at night. 7 of these beings, each paired with one of the first 7 pre-flood kings in the Uruk list of kings and sages, a cuneiform tablet dated to 164 BC. Their names also appear in the Neo-Assyrian ritual series called Bit Masiri and in the writings of Berosus. These are separate documents across centuries, all recording the same beings doing the same roles. Their images are carved into the walls of Assyrian palaces, figures wearing huge fish as cloaks with the fish's head sitting on top of their own, winged figures with the heads of birds, human-looking robed sages. Also, in every depiction across every culture that recorded them, they carry the same 2 objects, a small bucket and a pine cone. After the flood, 4 Apkallu appeared in the text, but these were part human and part whatever the originals were, and the text described them doing things that angered the gods. Whatever those first 7 advisors were, whatever came after the flood was a diminished version. And back to the reign lengths. They make a little more sense once you know what you're looking at. All 8 pre-flood king reigns are exact multiples of 144. And the probability of that being random is less than 1 in 10 billion. 28,000 divided by 144 equals 200 exactly. 36,000 divided by 144 equals 250 exactly. 43,200 divided by 144 equals 300 exactly. The Sumerians built their entire mathematical system around the number 60, which is where we get 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, and 360 degrees in a circle. They developed that specifically because it divides cleanly into the cycles of the sky. The units they used to record the pre-flood rains were called sars, with each lasting 3,600 years. And they were the same units used to calculate planetary movements, predict eclipses, and track the stars. The first king's reign of 28,800 years corresponds to 1 complete precessional cycle. Precession is the slow wobble of the Earth's axis. In roughly 26,000 years, the axis completes 1 full rotation relative to the stars, and the night sky returns to exactly where it started. Ancient astronomers called this the Great Year, and the King's List appears to be using this as a unit of time rather than lifespan. So what looks like a list of how long people lived may actually be a record of ages, each reign representing 1 full turn of the sky, with the flood marking the end of the last one. After the flood, the King's List continues, but the numbers are completely different. The first post-flood king ruled for 1,200 years, the next for 960, then 900, then 840, then 720. falling with each generation until the list reaches kings who rule for centuries, then decades, then years. By the time it reaches rulers that show up in other historical records, the reign lengths are normal, the same lifespans that people are living today. And Genesis follows an identical pattern. Before the flood, Adam lived for 930 years, Methuselah for 969 years, Noah for 950 years. After the flood, lifespans started declining. Abraham lives 175 years, Moses 120, and it kept going until we reached our normal lifespans. Scholars agree that Genesis drew from Mesopotamian sources and that the Sumerian King List predates the biblical text by centuries. The same memory moved from one tradition into the other, and what they both preserved is the same moment, when whatever existed before the flood ended and what we call human history began. The same thing shows up across cultures and continents that should have had no contact with each other. The Vedic texts describe 4 great ages, with lifespans running at thousands of years in the earliest and declining with each successive age, until the current one where people live a century at most. Ancient Egypt described a time when gods walked among humans, followed by diminished beings, followed by human history. The Greeks recorded a golden age, followed by silver, bronze, and iron, each shorter lived than the one before. Plato described the earliest people having direct contact with divine knowledge that was progressively lost over generations. They all preserve the memory of a world where something existed at scale that simply doesn't exist anymore, followed by a long decline to what we are now. And that number, 28,800, is where this meshes with modern science. Today's measurements put their precessional cycle at 25,772 years. Plato recorded it as 25,920 years. Neither of those are 28,800. The gap is about 3,000 years, which is roughly 10%. And the one solid explanation for this connects it to the Younger Dryas impact, a cosmic event that struck the ice sheet over North America about 12,900 years ago. When something that large hits and ice sheets collapse, the redistribution of mass on Earth's surface changes how fast the planet wobbles on its axis. The proposal is that before the impact, Earth's precessional cycle ran at 28,800 years. After the impact, it shifted toward what we're measuring today. If that's right, the King's List describes a sky that no longer exists, Earth's relationship to the stars before something hit the planet and changed it. The King's List may be recording the aftermath in the language of ancient kingship, with the flood marking the exact moment the old sky ended and the new one began. The Atrahasis Epic is the Sumerian flood text, and it actually gives a reason for the flood. The gods held a council because humanity had become too numerous and the noise had become intolerable. The text reads, "The earth screamed like a bull, and the deity, startled by its ferocity, heard the commotion. Humanity's clamor has gotten too loud for me, and its bustle has deprived me of sleep, cut off the supply to the cities." The flood was a council decision. The population had grown beyond what they wanted, and they reduced it. The flood wasn't sent as punishment for sin. It was sent because humanity had gotten too large and too loud. So the world before the flood, where 7 non-human beings handed civilization to humanity, where kings ruled for precessional cycles, where the sky wobbled at a different rate, the council decided that it had grown beyond what they wanted, and they ended it. And what came after that is us, working with the knowledge that we've been given before the reduction. The Weld-Blundell Prism has been sitting in a museum in Oxford since 1922. The math checks out by calculation, and it describes a world that already ended before any of us were born. So, 7 non-human beings gave humanity everything civilization is built on before the flood and then disappeared. Barossa said that since their first appearance, nothing further had been discovered. The other 6 advisors after the first one must have been managers of some sort to make sure that things went as planned. But apparently they didn't do a good job at noise control and pissed off the gods enough to flood the planet. Also, if they weren't human, what do you think they were? And then after the flood, they were described as hybrids, and then they went away, and then it was just us. Kind of a crazy sequence of events, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. As always, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate your time. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe, like, leave those comments. I love reading about this stuff and reading your insights and how you think about this stuff. It's very interesting to me. So, thank you so much. Until next time, I'll talk to you later.